Hello, everyone, and welcome to an overview of the cultural value patterns that you have already begun reading about in the chapter. I just want to give an overview of these. Everything that I'm going to mention here is pretty well said in the book. I just want to make sure we're clear on a few things. These are extremely important in understanding how culture and communication happen, and these cultural value patterns actually explain a whole lot about how cultures function in the world, in the day-to-day doing of that culture. So I'm just going to dive right in here, and I want to hit the high points. I'm not going to hit every little piece here. By the way, the PowerPoint that I am using is available in the resources section. It's in that original spring 2020 module in our D2L shell. Okay, so here we go really quickly. Values are extremely important. They're called values for a reason, and we are going to have to keep in mind something very important when we look through all of this. If you can remember all the way back to the dialectics, we have to keep in mind the cultural individual and the personal social dialectic when it comes to looking at cultural value patterns, because I have my own personal values, you have your own personal values, but then the culture and cultures that we are a part of then have their own larger cultural value patterns. That doesn't necessarily mean that they always line up, which is part of what the second discussion is for this week. But we have to remember that this chapter is about the larger scale of these cultural value patterns. Okay, so your book defines values very well. I know you can read. I'm not going to read these things to you. The important points here have to do with these two middle ones right here, okay? And then the bottom one are the ones that I'm really going to hit. This up here is the definition, okay? So the value patterns, not just values, okay? The value patterns form the basic criteria through which we evaluate ours and others' behavior. So this does work on the individual level as well. You use your values to do this, but we are talking about culture on the larger scale here, okay? So all through this chapter, you're going to see things like United States culture, European culture, Eastern culture. So we're talking about culture at large here. So these value patterns help us understand how our behaviors work and fit or don't with folks from other places. So we each have our own unique set of values based on our socialization. Yes, we do. But there are also larger values at work on a cultural system level. So you are in a dialectical relationship with these. And sometimes things line up really nicely. Other times they don't. They just don't. You might not value the same things that your culture tells you to value. In fact, I have a lot of students who do that, especially when we get to the masculinity, femininity value pattern here a little bit. Okay, so I'm not going to harp too much on this. The values, cultural values, okay, the value patterns are relatively stable and enduring, and they protect culture in times of crisis and stressful situations, which is really ironic because of where we're at right now. But so overall, values are really important, and if you're going to see another good definition of them, I like to point to these two things here. Okay, what a culture regards as good, bad, right, wrong, fair, unfair, just, unjust, beautiful, ugly, clean, dirty, valuable, worthless, appropriate, inappropriate, kind, cruel, the list goes on. Those are values, okay? And values are really going to be the deeper seated pieces of our belief system. Values are harder to change than beliefs and values, okay? Than attitudes. Values are harder to change than beliefs and attitudes, okay? Attitudes are the easiest to change, beliefs are the next easiest, and then the hardest are values, okay? Because they are the guiding principles in people's lives. And so cultures writ large have these value patterns. So I'm going to skip a couple of slides here. These are things that have to do with the functions that you're looking at in the first discussion. Make sure you take a look at that either in the PowerPoint or in the book for this week. I'm wanting to keep this relatively short and simple. I'm trying to keep it under 15 minutes for one screencast here because all of this are things you can get from the book. So the larger value patterns begin with individualism, collectivism. We are more on a spectrum. It's not really either or. Chances are you have pieces of each. This is a really nice breakdown here. sort of see the simplified differences between the individualistic and collectivistic cultures, and the ways that we view self and our relation to others are going to be rooted in this. We've actually talked quite a bit about individualism and collectivism in our class, so I'm not going to go too much into this. I do want to point out, though, you have the nuclear family here and the extended family here. Just as a reminder, in an individualistic culture, if I screw up at my job and get fired, it does not impact my second uncle. Okay, my second uncle twice removed. Whereas in a collectivistic culture, it might do that. Okay, and then the rest of these you can be seeing here. The independent self means that you form your own self, and the interdependent self means that your self is reliant on your sense of self, even as an adult, is interdependent with others around you. The independent self is not. Okay, so that's individualism, collectivism in a nutshell. Very, very quickly. There's more here I'm not going to really touch on because, again, you can take a look at this stuff as you go throughout here. But I do want to point out this phrase, the broad value tendencies. Okay, it's the same thing with individualism, broad value tendencies. These are the ways we can look at cultures sort of in a meta lens and understand how things happen, okay, and how things work there. So you can take a look at this as you were doing your discussions. That'll actually, it's better than me reading it to you anyway, right? So next is power distance. So individualism and collectivism is something that most students come into intercultural communication having a pretty good working knowledge of. Now we're to things that are probably going to be a little bit new. So next you have power distance. So power distance, and I'll come back to this. Power distance has to do with the extent to which individuals subscribe to the ideology of equal power distributions, the extent to which members adhere to unequal power distribution. So in the PowerPoint and in the text, it does a good job of distinguishing between small power distance cultures and large power distance cultures. And again, it's not going to be either or. You have to keep the dialectics in mind. There is the cultural and the individual and the personal and the social going on here, where you may have your own view of power distance, but your culture has another one, or maybe it lines up pretty well. Small power distance versus large power distance. Here you go. This is pretty self-explanatory. And what you will notice is that if you were to try to put pieces of your culture together here with this, you'd probably have to take pieces from both sides. But you would probably pull more from one than the other. That's how you would be able to determine, am I from a small power distance or a large power distance culture? Okay. For the record, the United States tends to lean small power distance. All right, versus other cultures that tend to lean more large power distance. Okay. Okay, here we go. Power distance. Next was uncertainty avoidance. Uncertainty avoidance can sometimes be confused with power distance. Uncertainty avoidance, the extent to which members of a culture do not mind conflicts or uncertain situations, and the extent to which they try to avoid uncertain situations. So the United States happens to be on the weak side, which means weak's less easy to understand than low. I like low or high. Low uncertainty avoidance makes a whole heck of a lot more sense when I'm trying to understand it, and that's how I like to do it. So low uncertainty avoidance encourages risk taking, makes sense, and conflict approaching modes. All right. Strong uncertainty avoidance, which means they like to avoid it, right? They prefer clear procedures and conflict avoidant behaviors. Okay. So you can see the breakdown here. It's all pretty clear. Again, all of this can be seen in your book and here in the PowerPoint. Okay. So as you're going through trying to understand these cultural value patterns, they are really important to be seen individually and together. So your culture is a makeup of whatever piece of individualism or collectivism, power distance, the uncertainty avoidance, and then how gender is expected to be done. Okay, so there's all of this different stuff that comes together for culture. Now, linking to where we were before we were here, all of this is linked to worldview. You can hardly separate worldview from the cultural value patterns, and that's why we do worldview first and then come into this. And so, I do want to say this about this value pattern, the feminine masculine value pattern. Um, you can still look at cultures and you can see how they view gender roles. You just can, okay? However, the the language around the value pattern is changing. And so the idea of feminine, masculine, femininity, masculinity, the meanings of those words have been exploded all over the place for the last really 30 years of feminism and in postmodernism. I expect that the next time a textbook is published, actually, or the one that I'm pulling from, I expect that instead of it being femininity, masculinity, they will be referred to as fluid and complementary. Um, it's just and then your culture will be somewhere on the spectrum there. Again, you may not line up with that yourself. Your culture may be very that's a complementary and distinct social gender roles, and you're actually more fluid. Okay, as an individual, again, the cultural and the individual dialectic is important to remember here. So you can take a look at what these mean. They're relatively easy and self-explanatory, I think. Here is the table. Again, this PowerPoint is available if you want to dive into this further. I just want to make sure this is clear. Please let me know if you have any questions about this stuff, okay? Sometimes these do line up, by the way, just to show you individualistic cultures tend to be small power distance, weak or low uncertainty avoidant, and more on uh, the the fluid side of sex roles. And then collectivism, there you go, okay, tends to be more large power distance, more strong uncertainty avoidance, and then more on the complementary side of things. Okay, so let's see, we're at 12 minutes. We're doing pretty good here. So next, you have meaning, destiny, and time. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but these value patterns are actually the ones that my students sort of really get more interested in. I find meaning has to do with what is meaningful work, what is meaningful use of your time, what does it mean to be you in your culture, and so what do people consider meaningful, doing or being? And I think that the current situation we are in, with not really being able to leave our houses and how it's driving some people nuts, shows you where United States culture probably is on this deal. There are three versions of this. You have the doing, the being and becoming, and the being cultures here. Again, it's a spectrum. And there's where is the larger culture at, and then where are you? You'll be somewhere on there. The United States culture is usually on the doing side of things, and when you can't do, it's pretty hard, and people are having a hard time right now. So being and becoming and being, you can see what those mean, and actually they're hard to even fathom for people who are not from those. Next is destiny, the people nature value orientation is the relationship between people and the natural or supernatural environment, one of control, harmony, or subjugation. We went through the worldview timeline, the Western worldview timeline, and we saw quite a bit of an answer to this. And this is why I wish we were in class together to help pull these connections, because you can see how this value pattern has been driven and just circles right back around to worldview in regard to the relationship with the natural world that we have in the Western world. Okay. The United States is more on the controlling, mastering side, even still with where we are at with things moving that way. And then there's subjugation. Subjugation to nature means nature is a force beyond the control, and we can't, like, we are subject to its whims. And in some ways, this one might be the truth, as we're starting to see, but it's not the value that the culture holds. I'm going to jump to one more screencast. We're only going to take about 2 more minutes. Okay. See you in the next one.